Commander Marcus Cole stood alone in the hydroponic bay and let the green wash over him like a memory he could not release. 3 years he had lived among the Velcari, and 3 years he had missed the simple things that humans took for granted. Smell of grass after rain, and the way sunlight filtered through leaves, and the sound of wind moving through wheat fields back on Earth. The hydroponic bay was the closest thing to home he could find on the alien flagship called the Eternal Silence. It was a massive ship that stretched for miles, and it carried thousands of Velcari, warriors and workers, and it held the beating heart of an empire that could crush humanity without breaking stride. But they had not crushed humanity, and that was why. Marcus was here. He was the treaty made flesh, and he was the proof that humans and Velcari could exist in the same universe without one destroying the other. His job was simple in theory, but impossible in practice, and it required him to translate not just words, but entire ways of thinking between two species that had almost nothing in common. Velcari were insects in the way that humans were mammals, but that comparison failed to capture what they truly were. They stood on 2 legs like humans, but they had 4 arms, and their bodies were covered in chitin that gleamed like polished stone. Their faces held compound eyes that shifted color with their moods, and their mouths could produce sounds that human ears could barely register. They communicated through pheromones as much as through speech, and their society was built on the hive and on obedience to the queen who ruled all. Marcus had learned their language and their customs and their history, but he had never expected to learn something else. He had never expected to learn their hearts. The door to the hydroponic bay slid open with a soft hiss, and Marcus turned to see her enter, and his chest tightened the way it always did when she appeared. Vessel keeper Sitha moved through the doorway with the grace that all Velcari possessed, and her chitin was the color of deep space scattered with points of light, like stars embedded in her shell. Her compound eyes shifted from amber to violet when she saw him, and that small change meant more to Marcus than any human smile ever could. She was responsible for the living systems of the ship and the bioorganic networks that pulsed through every wall and floor like veins carrying blood. The Eternal Silence was not built so much as grown, and Sitha was its gardener and its doctor and its mother all at once. "You are here again," she said, and her voice carried harmonics that human vocal cords could never produce. "I like it here," Marcus replied, and he gestured at the plants around them. "It reminds me of where I came from." Sitha walked closer, and her 4 arms moved in, patterns that Marcus had learned to read over countless conversations. 2 arms folded across her chest in the Velcari gesture of contentment, while her secondary arms hung loose at her sides. "I do not understand why you need reminding," she said. "You carry your origin inside you, and it shapes everything you do and say and think." Marcus smiled, and he knew she could not read human expressions the way he could read hers, but she had learned to recognize this one. "Humans are strange that way," he said. "We hold on to things even when holding on serves no purpose." "Yes," Sitha agreed, and she stepped closer still. "This is one of many things about your kind that I find difficult to process." They stood together among the green growing things, and the silence between them was comfortable in a way that Marcus had never experienced with another Velcari. With others of her kind, there was always a distance and a formality that reminded him he was an outsider, but Sitha looked at him like he was something worth seeing, and she listened to him like his words carried weight. And it started with questions about Earth, and about human biology, and about the strange soft bodies that humans inhabited. She had been curious in the way that scientists are curious, and Marcus had been happy to answer, because talking to her was easy in a way that talking to other Velcari was not. But somewhere along the way the questions had changed. She began to ask about human relationships, and about families, and about the bonds that humans formed with each other. Marcus had tried to explain love to her, and he had watched her compound eyes shift through colors he had never seen before. "This concept does not exist among my kind," She had told him, "We have duty, and we have hierarchy, and we have the biological drive to reproduce when the Queen permits. But attachment of the kind you describe," she had continued, "this choosing of one individual above all others, and this need to be near them, and this pain when they are absent. We do not have words for this because we do not experience it." Marcus had nodded and felt something crack open in his chest, because he had realized in that moment that he was already lost. He was already feeling everything she claimed her species could not feel, and he was feeling it for her. That had been 6 months ago now. They met in the hydroponic bay whenever their schedules aligned, and they talked for hours about everything and nothing. And sometimes when the ship was quiet and no one else was near, Sitha would reach out with her secondary arms and touch his. Chitin was cool against his skin, and her touch was gentle in a way that seemed impossible for a being made of shell and claw. She never spoke when she touched him, and Marcus never asked what it meant because he was afraid of the answer. He was afraid she would say it meant nothing, and he was afraid she would say it meant everything. Both possibilities terrified him in equal measure tonight. Her hand found his in the green darkness of the hydroponic bay, and she held on longer than she ever had before. "Marcus," she said, and his name sounded different when she spoke it, and it sounded like music written in a language he was only beginning to learn. "I need to tell you something, and I do not know how to say it because I do not have the words." Marcus turned to face her, and her eyes were cycling through colors so fast that he could not track them. "My body is changing," she whispered. "My thoughts are changing, and I find myself thinking of you when I should be thinking of my duties. I find myself wanting to be near you when there is no logical reason for proximity. I find myself experiencing something that should not exist in a Velcari, and I am frightened. Marcus, I am so frightened." Marcus reached up with his free hand and touched her face, and her chitin was smooth and warm beneath his palm. "I know," he said. "I feel it too. What do we do?" she asked. "I do not know," Marcus admitted. "But whatever it is, we will figure it out together." They stood in the hydroponic bay surrounded by earth plants growing in alien soil, and they held on to each other like two people drowning who had found something solid at last. Neither of them noticed the small maintenance drone watching from the shadows and recording everything with perfect mechanical precision. Neither of them knew that their secret was already traveling through the ship's network toward the one being who saw everything and knew everything and ruled everything. Queen was about to learn that something impossible was growing on her ship, and she would want to see it for herself. The message arrived at third shift when the corridors of the eternal silence were dim, and most of the crew had entered their rest cycles. Marcus was lying on the narrow bed in his quarters and staring at the ceiling and thinking about Sitha when his personal console chimed with an incoming transmission. He sat up and looked at the screen, and his blood turned to ice in his veins. A single glyph pulsed on the display, and it was a symbol that every being in the Velcari hegemony would recognize. Instantly, the seal of the Queen below the seal were coordinates to a location deep in the restricted sections of the ship, and a time stamp that gave him 30 minutes to arrive. There was no explanation and no escort assignment and no indication of what the summons concerned, just the command to appear before her transcendence. Valeth the thousandth in the throne room of the eternal silence. Marcus had served on this ship for 3 years, and in all that time, he had never received a direct communication from the Queen. He had seen her twice from great distances and surrounded by dozens of attendants, and he had watched her speakers translate her pheromone language into words that lesser beings could understand, but she had never acknowledged him directly, and she had never indicated that she knew he existed at all until now. Marcus stood and dressed in his formal diplomatic uniform, with hands that trembled no matter how hard he tried to steady them. He told himself that this could be routine, and that perhaps the Queen simply wanted to discuss the treaty or ask questions about human affairs. But deep in his gut, he knew the truth. She had found out about Sita. Somehow she had learned about the meetings in the hydroponic bay and the conversations that stretched for hours and the touches that meant everything. And now she was going to make him answer for it. Marcus left his quarters and walked through corridors that seemed longer and darker than they ever had before. The eternal silence was never truly quiet, and there was always the soft hum of bioorganic systems and the distant footsteps of crew members going about their duties. But tonight everything felt muted, and the ship itself seemed to be holding its breath. He passed Velcari, warriors standing motionless in their wall niches, and their compound eyes tracked his movement without any other sign of awareness. He walked beneath bioluminescent murals that depicted 10,000 years of Velcari conquest and expansion across the galaxy. He moved through sections of the ship he had never seen before, and the architecture grew older and stranger the deeper he went. Walls here were covered in living tissue that pulsed with slow rhythms, and the floor beneath his feet was warm like the skin of some vast, sleeping creature. Marcus realized he was approaching the heart of the ship and the place where the Queen had made her home for centuries. Finally, he stood before the doors of the throne room. They rose 3 stories above him, and they were made of material that shifted and flowed like liquid metal frozen in the moment of motion. There were no guards, and there were no attendants, and there was no one to announce him or prepare him for what waited beyond. The doors simply opened. They parted without sound and revealed a chamber so vast that Marcus could not see the far walls. The ceiling disappeared into darkness high above, and the floor was made of crystal that glowed with soft inner light. And at the center of it all, upon a throne that seemed to grow from the floor like a living thing, sat the Queen of the Velcari hegemony. Valith the Thousand was enormous in a way that photographs and distant glimpses had failed to prepare him for. She was twice the size of any Velcari he had ever seen, and her body was covered in chitin that gleamed like polished gold, streaked with veins of deepest purple wings folded behind her back, and they caught the light like stained glass windows in a cathedral. Back on Earth, her face held hundreds of compound eyes arranged in patterns that shifted and changed as she looked at him. Each eye was a different color, and together they created a kaleidoscope effect that made it impossible to look away. She was ancient, and she was terrible, and she was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with human standards of beauty. She was power made manifest, and she was watching him with the patient attention of a being who had seen civilizations rise and fall. Marcus walked forward, and his footsteps echoed in the vast silence of the chamber. He stopped at a respectful distance from the throne, and he knelt and pressed his forehead to the crystal floor. "Your Transcendence," he said, and his voice sounded small and weak in the immense space. For a long moment there was nothing but silence. Then the Queen moved, and the air around Marcus changed. Pheromones washed over him in waves, and his translator implants struggled to process the complex chemical language. The Queen was speaking to him directly without the filter of her speakers, and the experience was overwhelming her. Words formed in his mind like thoughts that were not his own. "Your minute" was not a question. And Marcus did not try to answer. "You have lived among my children for 3 cycles, and you have learned our ways and our language and our custom." Marcus kept his head bowed and waited. "I have watched your kind since before you achieved spaceflight, and I have wondered what purpose such fragile creatures could serve in a universe built on STRENGTH." The pheromones shifted, and Marcus felt something like amusement in the chemical signature. "Why our bodies break so easily, and your lives end so quickly. And yet you persist. You spread across worlds that should kill you, and you adapt to conditions that would destroy any rational species. I've asked my scholars to explain this paradox, and they have given me theories about creativity and risk-taking and individual initiative. None of their theories have satisfied him." May the Queen leaned forward on her throne, and Marcus could feel the weight of her attention pressing down on him like a physical force. Now believe I have found the nest. She gestured with one enormous hand, and Marcus felt permission to raise his head. He looked up at her, and her hundreds of eyes studied him with an intensity that made him feel like a specimen under a microscope. Why, O love, one of my secul diridum. The words hit Marcus like a blow to the chest. He opened his mouth to speak, but another wave of pheromones crashed over him. Silence was a command that bypassed his conscious mind entirely, and his voice died in his throat. I did not summon you here to hear explanations or excuses. He summoned you because I wished to undies your Stian queen settled back, and her wings rustled with a sound like wind through autumn leaves. Teal and me, and the pheromones shifted again, and Marcus felt the prohibition lift from his voice. Geez. This love that makes your kind so dangerously unpredictable. What is this madness that drives you to bond with things that cannot bond with you in return? What is this fire that burns in your species and refuses to go? Marcus looked up at the ancient being who ruled an empire that spanned 1,000 worlds, and he realized that she was not angry. She was curious, and that was somehow more terrifying than anger could ever be. Marcus knelt on the crystal floor of the throne room and looked up at the queen of the Velcari hegemony and searched for words that could explain something he barely understood himself. How could he describe love to a being whose species had evolved beyond it thousands of generations ago? How could he make her understand what it felt like to see someone and feel your whole world shift on its axis? How could he explain the terror and the joy and the desperate need that came with giving your heart to another person? Your transcendence. Marcus began, and his voice was steady even though his hands were shaking. I do not know if I can explain it in a way that makes sense to you. The queen's pheromones shifted, and he felt something like patience in the chemical signature It. Marcus took a deep breath and organized his thoughts. Love is not rational, he said. It does not follow logic, and it does not serve efficiency, and it often makes no sense at all. A human can love someone who is completely wrong for them, and a human can love someone they have never met, and a human can love someone who died 100 years before they were born. We love things that cannot love us back. Marcus continued. We love our pets and our homes and our ships and our nations. We love ideas, and we love memories, and we love possibilities that may never come true. The queen's eyes shifted through colors that Marcus could not name. But when we love another person, Marcus said, and his voice grew stronger as he found his footing. It is different from all other forms of love. It is choosing someone and being chosen in return. And it is building something together that neither person could build alone. It means their happiness becomes your happiness, and their pain becomes your pain, and their dreams become your dreams. It means you would sacrifice anything for them, and you would fight anyone for them, and you would cross the entire universe just to see them smile. Marcus looked directly into the queen's shifting eyes and spoke the truth that he had been afraid to admit even to himself. When I am with Sitha, I feel like I am finally home, he said. When I am away from her, I feel like part of me is missing. I did not choose to feel this way, and I cannot make it stop, and I would not want to even if I could, because loving her makes me more than I was before, and the universe is more beautiful when she is in it. The throne room was silent for a long moment. Then the queen rose from her throne, and Marcus watched in awe as she descended toward him with steps that shook the crystal floor. She was vast and ancient and terrifying, and she stopped close enough that he could see his own reflection in her countless eyes. I have conquered 1,000 species, the queen said, and her pheromones were heavy with something that felt almost like sorrow. I have witnessed the birth and death of stars, and I have ruled my people for 900 years, and in all that time I have never heard anyone speak of anything the way you speak of this. She circled him slowly, and her wings cast shifting shadows across the glowing floor. Why or species is a contradiction that my scholars cannot resolve. Are weak in body and short in lifespan and fractured in society. Every metric we use to measure species you should have destroyed yourselves long ago. Yet you survived and yet you thrived and yet you reached the stars and met uses equals rather than subjs. The queen stopped in front of Marcus and her pheromones shifted. Again, I believe I now understand why she lowered herself until her face was level with his, and the experience was like standing before a god who had decided to notice you. While your weakness is your strength, your madness is your advantage. Love so fiercely that you will do anything to protect what you love. Bond so deeply that you will sacrifice everything. For those bonds of their species fight for territory or resources or survival, but humans fight for each other, and that makes you HFY. And Marcus had never thought of humanity that way before. He had always seen love as something soft and gentle, and maybe even weak, but the queen was right. Love had driven humans to cross oceans and climb mountains and venture into the void of space. Love had inspired art and music and literature that moved people across centuries. Love had motivated ordinary people to become heroes and to face impossible odds and to triumph against enemies that should have destroyed them. Love was not weakness. Love was the most powerful force in the universe. I understand now, the queen said, and she rose back to her full height. I understand why my children feared you when we first made contact. Understand why my advisors counseled caution rather than conquest. You are not dangerous because of your weapons or your technology, or dangerous because you would burn the galaxy down to protect the ones you love, and we who have forgotten how to feel such things have nitrogen monoxide defense against that kind of fear. The queen returned to her throne and settled onto it with the weight of centuries. But understanding your species does not resolve the question of what to do with you or with the vessel keeper who has caught your human. Dionysius Marcus felt his heart stop. Your transcendence, he said, and fear crept into his voice. What do you mean? Scytha came to me, the queen replied, and her pheromones carried something that might have been regrets. Scytha confessed what she felt for you, and she begged me to fix Hirsch, asked me to remove this contamination from her mind and restore her to what she was before she met Yo. Marcus felt the world tilt beneath him. No, he whispered. Please no. The queen watched him with her hundreds of eyes. I told her. Anna. Marcus looked up, and his face was wet with tears he had not felt falling. What? He asked. I refused her request, the queen said, and her voice was almost gentle. Now I must decide what to do with both of you. Marcus stared at the queen, and his mind struggled to process what she had said. Had asked to be fixed, and the queen had refused. But why would the ruler of 1,000 worlds care about the emotional state of a single vessel keeper? We would. She refused a request that would restore proper Velcari function to one of her children. Your transcendence, Marcus said, and his voice was rough with emotion. I do not understand. Why would you refuse to help her? The queen's pheromones shifted, and for the first time Marcus detected something that felt almost like vulnerability in the chemical signature. Bise. When Scytha spoke to me about you, something changed in her pheromone signature, something I have never witnessed in any Velcari in 900 years of rulite. Was not illness, and it was not corruption, and it was not malfunction. It was something. Ani, this queen's wings rustled, and the light that filtered through them cast rainbow patterns across the crystal floor. Or rather, it was something very old, something my kind abandoned so long ago that we forgot it ever existed. Marcus rose to his feet, and his protocol training screamed at him that he should remain kneeling, but he needed to see her clearly for what came next. What do you mean, something old? He asked. The queen was silent for a moment, and her eyes cycled through colors that seemed to reflect deep and ancient memories. Velcari were not always as we are now. In the beginning, before the first hive mind was created, we were individuals. Lived and loved and died as separate beings with separate HEs. Her pheromones grew heavy with something that felt like grief. We bonded with each other the way your kind does. We chose partners, and we built families, and we would have done anything to protect the ones we loved, and that love nearly destroyed you. As Marcus listened in silence as the queen continued. We loved so fiercely that we went to war for that love, killed for it, and died for it, and burned our world in the name of it. Wars of passion lasted for 10,000 years, and when they ended, our species was on the edge of extinction. So our ancestors made a choice. They created the hive mind, and they gave up their individual hearts, and they cut away the ability to love. They became efficient, and they became logical, and they became cold, and they survived. The queen looked down at Marcus, and her eyes held depths of time he could not comprehend. I was born into this coldness, and I have known nothing else. I have ruled, and I have conquered, and I have expanded our empire across 1,000 worlds. Have done everything a queen is supposed to do, but in the quiet hours, when the ship sleeps and I am alone with my thoughts, have wondered if we made a mistake. Marcus felt something shift in his understanding of the being before him. She was not just a ruler, and she was not just an alien. She was someone who had lived for nearly a millennium without ever feeling what he felt every time he looked at Sithash. Was someone who had everything except the one thing that made life worth living. You wonder what it would be like, Marcus said softly, to feel what we feel. The queen's pheromones spiked with something sharp and sudden. Yes, the word echoed through the chamber with a force that made Marcus stagger. I have watched your species, and I have studied your art and your music and your stories, and in all of them I see this love that you speak of. See beings who would cross galaxies for each a theory. See beings who would defy death itself for the ones they cherish. See beings who burn with a fire that my kind extinguished long ago. And I wonder what it would be like to feel that fire. The queen rose from her throne again and descended to stand before Marcus. She was so close that he could feel the warmth radiating from her massive body. I refuse to fix Sitha because I do not believe she is Burkini. Believe she has found something, that we lost something precious and dangerous and beautiful, and I want to see where it lies. Marcus looked up at the queen, and he saw something in her countless eyes that he had never expected to see. He saw hope. What are you going to do with us? He asked. The queen's pheromones shifted again, and this time they carried something that felt almost like a smile. I am going to give you a CHOIs. She gestured, and the great doors of the throne room swung open. Marcus turned, and his heart stopped. When he saw Sitha standing in the doorway, she was trembling, and her compound eyes were wide with fear, and her forearms were wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold herself together. Vessel keeper Sitha, the queen said, and her voice carried across the chamber. Siom forward. Sitha walked into the throne room with slow, uncertain steps. She did not look at Marcus, and her eyes remained fixed on the floor in front of her feet. She stopped beside him and knelt and pressed her forehead to the crystal. The queen looked down at both of them, and her pheromones shifted through complex patterns that Marcus could not fully translate. I have spoken with the human, the queen said. I have heard his explanation of this love that has infected you both, and I have made my decision. Sitha trembled beside Marcus, and he wanted desperately to reach out and take her hand, but he did not dare move. Vessel keeper Sitha, you came to me and asked to be restored to what you were before. Asked me to remove the feelings that cloud your thoughts and distract you from your duties. Denied your request, but I am giving you another CHNC. And Sivuri's voice grew heavy with the weight of the choice she was offering. I can still fix you if that is what you truly want. He can remove this human madness from your mind and restore you to perfect Velcari function. You will forget what you felt, and you will be content, and you will serve the hive as you were born to do. Oh, the pheromone word hung in the air like a held breath, or you can remain as you are rebonded to this human feeling. What our kind forgot how to feel. Choice is yours, Vessel keeper, and I will not make it for you. The throne room of the eternal silence held its breath as Sitha knelt on the crystal floor and faced the most important decision of her life. Marcus stood beside her, and every fiber of his being screamed at him to speak up and to fight for her. and to tell the queen that she could not do this, but he knew that this was not his choice to make this. It was Scytha's moment and Scytha's future and Scytha's heart. All he could do was stand beside her and wait. Scytha raised her head slowly, and her compound eyes met the queen's shifting gaze. "Your transcendence," she said, and her voice trembled. "Before I answer, may I speak freely?" The queen's pheromones shifted with something that might have been surprise while you. Scytha rose to her feet, and her forearms hung at her sides. She was still trembling, but there was something new in her posture, and something that looked almost like resolve. "When I first began to feel these things, I believed I was malfunctioning," Scytha said. "I believed that something had gone wrong in my neural pathways, and that I needed to be repaired. I felt shame, and I felt fear, and I wanted nothing more than to be normal again." She turned to look at Marcus, and her eyes shifted through colors he had never seen before, colors that seemed to glow with an inner light that made his breath catch in his throat. "But then I realized something," Scytha continued. "I realized that I had never truly been alive before I met him. I had existed and I had functioned, and I had performed my duties with perfect efficiency. But I had never felt the warmth of connection, or the joy of being known, or the peace of being accepted exactly as I am." She turned back to face the queen. "You asked me to choose between what I was and what I have become. But your transcendence, there is no choice. I would rather feel pain for the rest of my life than go back to feeling nothing at all. I would rather burn with this human madness than freeze in Velcari perfection. I choose him. I choose love. I choose to feel." The words echoed through the vast chamber, and Marcus felt tears streaming down his face. He stepped forward and took Scytha's hands in his, and she turned to look at him with eyes that held everything he had ever hoped to see. "I choose you too," Marcus said. "I will always choose you." Scytha made a sound that was not quite Velcari and not quite human. It was something new and something that belonged only to them. She pressed her forehead to his, and her chitin was warm against his skin, and in that moment the entire universe narrowed down to the two of them standing together in the light of the crystal floor. The queen watched them from her throne, and her hundreds of eyes reflected the scene before her. For a long moment she was silent, and her pheromones were still and unreadable. Then she spoke, "It is Deon E. Marcus." And Scytha turned to face her, and her voice carried across the chamber with the weight of royal decree. "While you have made your choice, Vessel Keeper Scython, I will honor it." The queen rose from her throne and descended toward them, and her massive form cast shadows that stretched across the glowing floor. "I have ruled for 900 years. Have made decisions that shaped the fate of civilization. Have witnessed the birth of stars and the death of worlds, and in all that time I have never witnessed anything like what I have seen in this chamber." Tionage. She stopped before them and lowered herself until her face was level with theirs. "I have seen a human explain his love with words that burned brighter than any weaponi. Have seen a Velcari choose feeling over function and chaos over ordinary. Have seen two beings from different worlds find something in each other that transcends biology and duty and illogies." The queen's pheromones shifted, and for the first time, Marcus detected something in them that felt almost like warmth. "And I have felt something stir in my own heart. Something that I believed was dead, something that my kind killed 100,000 years. Agio." The queen's eyes cycled through colors that seemed to reflect deep and powerful emotion. "PRH, we were wrong to cut away our hearts. Perhaps in our quest for survival, we lost something more precious than we knew. Perhaps it is time for the Velcari to remember what we used to be." She rose to her full height and spread her wings wide, and the light that filtered through them filled the chamber with cascading rainbows. "Human and Vessel Keeper Live, your impossible love, where all can see it. Let my children witness what they have forgotten. Let them remember that there is more to existence than efficiency and duty. And perhaps some of them will find the courage to feel." Aja and Marcus bowed low, and Scytha followed. "Thank you, your transcendence," Marcus said. You have given us a gift beyond measure. The queen's pheromones shifted one final time to know. Human, it is you who have given me a gift. You have shown me that the fire we extinguished still burns somewhere in the universe, and that perhaps it can be rekindled now. Go before I remember that I am supposed to be a cold and logical. Larcus took Sitha's hand, and together they walked toward the great doors of the throne room. As they reached the threshold, Sitha paused and looked back at the queen, who sat alone on her ancient throne. Your Transcendence, Sitha called out. It is not too late for you either. Love is not something you are born with. It is something you choose. And you can choose it at any time. Even after 900 years, the queen was silent for a long moment. Then her pheromones carried something that felt almost like a Lavgeo vessel keeper. You grow too bold for someone who just defied every tradition of our species. But there was no anger in her voice, only something that sounded almost like hope. Marcus and Sitha left the throne room, and the great doors closed behind them. They walked through the corridors of the eternal silence, hand in hand, and crew members stopped to stare at the impossible sight of a human and a Velcari walking together as equals and partners. And lovers, let them stare, Marcus thought. Let them see what love looks like. Let them wonder if they might find it too. And somewhere behind them, in the vast silence of her ancient throne room, the queen of the Velcari hegemony sat alone and remembered what it had felt like to want something she could not have. And for the first time in 900 years, she began to hope that wanting might not be weakness after all. Perhaps the humans had been right all along. Perhaps love was not madness. Perhaps love was the only thing that made any of it worthwhile. The queen looked at her empty throne room and made a decision. She would watch this experiment unfold. She would see what happened when a human and a Velcari built a life together, and if it worked, if love could bridge the gap between species, then perhaps it was time for the Velcari to evolve again, not away from feeling, but toward it. Humanity had given her people a gift, and she would not let it go to waste.